Hi, and welcome to another episode of The Lowest Crime, where we dive into some of the most notorious true crime cases from the Netherlands. My name is Eline, and today we're talking about a particularly tragic case that shook the city of Arnhem on New Year's Eve in 2019. This story is not just absolutely devastating because of the lives lost, but also because of the extremely young people responsible. This is the story of how a celebration turned into a nightmare when a small group of teenagers, armed with fireworks and a sense of invincibility, set off a chain of events that led to the devastating loss of 2 lives. Before we dive in, please note that today's episode includes descriptions of a fire outbreak, injuries, and the death of a child, which some listeners may find disturbing. And while I try my very best to bring you all the known facts, I am just an amateur podcast creator and there is always a chance of me making a mistake. So, let's dive in. It was December 31st, so New Year's Eve, in 2019 in Arnhem, a city known for its rich history and vibrant culture. It was buzzing with festive energy as residents prepared to welcome the new year. The atmosphere was electric, with fireworks lighting up the sky and celebrations echoing through the streets. In an old apartment complex located in the districts of Gelderseplein, a group of teenagers had gathered to ring in the new year. The building, like many others in the area, was a mix of families, elderly residents and young people. Amongst the group were 2 boys, aged 12 and 13, who lived in the building. They were typical teenagers, full of energy, curiosity, and a youthful sense of invincibility that makes everything seem like an adventure. As the clock ticked closer to midnight, the boys, excited by the prospect of fireworks, began setting off small firecrackers and rockets. For those unfamiliar with Dutch culture, firework use in the Netherlands is more regulated compared to Canada and the US. In the Netherlands, fireworks are primarily used during New Year's Eve, and their sales restricted to the last few days of the year, typically December 28th to December 31st. Additionally, there are designated times when fireworks can be legally set off, usually from 6 p.m. on December 31st to 2 a.m. on January 1st. This also means that once it is the time of year where fireworks are finally allowed, people go nuts. There is not one beautifully organized fireworks show, but just one big chaos of people, young and old, setting off fireworks in their back and front yards. So, for these young boys, this was just harmless fun, a long-awaited way to join in the celebrations that were taking place all around them. The fireworks they had were not big illegal ones, but just the kind that you could legally buy in any fireworks store. It was the kind that, although dangerous like any fireworks, was seen as relatively safe. You could, theoretically, even hold it in your hand, though it might hurt your fingers, it would not cause any serious harm. They were just following the typical routine of 2 young boys who had been allowed out to enjoy the fireworks. The boys were told that they had to be home by 12:45 a.m. When one of the boys received a call from his father, he explained that they were just setting off the last of their fireworks before heading home. Security footage from that night showed the boys engaging in what seemed like typical child's play. They were seen setting off some small fireworks, playing with them almost like toys. They even tossed a small firework into the elevator at one point, covering their ears as if expecting a big explosion. Almost like something out of a cartoon. They also found an old, discarded couch in the lobby of the apartment building, a place where residents often left unwanted furniture, sort of like a casual recycling effort. The boys, seeing it as a harmless prank, lit a small firework on the couch. The security footage captures the innocence of their actions. They had no idea of the catastrophic consequences that were about to unfold. At first, the fireworks only caused a small flare-up, which quickly died down. And because nothing dramatic happened, the boys got bored and quickly moved on and walked away. That final act of childlike playfulness, so common and innocent in its intent, ended in unimaginable tragedy. As they left, something terrifying happened. The small spark they left behind, that they thought had died out, began to reignite. The couch, made of highly flammable material, suddenly burst into flames. The fire spread rapidly, not only consuming the couch, but also igniting the ceiling of the lobby. The fire developed with terrifying speed, sending thick, toxic smoke billowing through the hallways and into the building's ventilation system. And within minutes, what had been a minor prank had turned into a deadly inferno. While the boys were riding the elevator back up to their apartment, a family, a father, mother, and their 2 young children, were descending from the 5th floor apartment. Maybe awakened by the smell of smoke or the sound of the fire alarm. They were just trying to escape what they likely thought was a minor fire. But as the elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor, they were met with a wall of intense heat, thick smoke, and deadly fumes. In a desperate bid to escape, the father tried to send the elevator back up, but the smoke had already filled the cabin. Tragically, the father and his 4-year-old son were overcome by the smoke and toxic gases, losing consciousness and their lives inside the elevator. The mother and her 8-year-old daughter, although severely affected by the smoke, managed to survive and were rushed to the hospital. The loss of the father and young child cast a dark shadow over the community. The image of a father trying to protect his young son in their final moments remains a haunting memory for everyone involved. The tragedy of that night was made even more devastating by the circumstances surrounding it. The boys had no idea that the fire would reignite and cause such heartbreak. They had just been 2 typically careless young boys, out having some fun, with absolutely no intention to do any harm. In the aftermath of the fire, investigators quickly began piecing together what had happened. The fire's origin was traced back to the couch in the lobby, and the security camera footage revealed the chilling truth. The 2 boys, seen playing with fireworks near the couch, were clearly responsible for starting the fire, though they had not intended to cause any harm. The boys were arrested and brought in for questioning. Given their young age, just 12 and 13 years old, the authorities faced a difficult decision. The boys had clearly caused the tragedy, but they were children, and likely unaware of the full consequences of their actions. After the initial questioning, the boys were released to their parents, pending further investigation. This decision sparked a wave of controversy and public outrage. Many in the community felt that the boys should be held accountable for their actions regardless of their age. The families of the victims were, understandably, particularly vocal, demanding justice for their loved ones. The legal process that followed was closely watched by the public. The case was taken up by the court in Gelderland, and the debate began over how to handle such a tragic event involving such young individuals. The question on everyone's mind was clear. How should society deal with children who commit such a serious offense? The trial was a difficult and emotional affair, marked by intense debates and deep divisions. The prosecution argued that the boys' actions, though not malicious, were reckless and directly caused the death of a father and his young son. They presented the surveillance footage as key evidence, showing how the boys had set off fireworks in the hallway, leading to the tragic fire. They also highlighted the devastating impact the fire had had on the victims' families, describing the pain and loss that they had endured. On the other hand, the defense sought to portray the boys as victims of circumstance. They argued that the boys were too young to fully understand the consequences of their actions, and that they had not intended to cause any harm. The defense brought in expert witnesses, including child psychologists and social workers, who testified about the boys' mental and emotional state. They described the boys as being deeply traumatized by the events, struggling to cope with the weight of their actions. The defense argued that the boys had already suffered enough, and that further punishment would be cruel and unnecessary. The trial also sparked a broader debate about the legal system's treatment of juvenile offenders. Some argued that the boys should be treated as adults, given the severity of the crime, while others believed that they should be given the chance to rehabilitate and learn from their mistakes. The case touched on deep issues of justice, responsibility, and the capacity for forgiveness. On June 29, 2020, the court issued a verdict. The judge, taking into account the boy's age and lack of intent, decided not to impose any punishment. The court concluded that the boys had already faced significant consequences, emotional trauma, public scrutiny, and the loss of their home. The judge emphasized that the boys were not hardened criminals, but children who had made a terrible mistake. It was decided that further punishment would not serve the best interest of justice or the boys' future. The decision was met with mixed reactions. For the families of the victims, there was little solace in the verdict. The loss of a father and a young child was permanent, and the pain was immeasurable. The aftermath of the trial left a lasting impact on everyone involved. The boys and their families moved away, hoping to escape the shadow of that fateful night. The community of Arnhem continued to mourn the loss of its members, grappling with the complex emotions of grief, anger, and forgiveness. The building on het Gelderseplein, once a bustling home to many families, now stood as a stark reminder of the tragedy. Many residents moved out, unable to live with the memories of that night. The building's owners eventually decided to renovate, hoping to erase the physical scars of the fire, but the emotional scars would always remain. The lingering question of how such a tragedy could have been prevented also remained. The loss of life, especially that of a young child, is always difficult to comprehend. And while the legal system ultimately decided not to punish the boys further, the community and the country was left to grapple with the consequences of that fateful night. It sparked an already rising national discussion about the dangers of fireworks, particularly in the hands of children. Calls for stricter regulations on the sale and use of fireworks grew louder, and some communities even considered banning them altogether. The tragedy in Arnhem became a somber reminder of how quickly celebrations can turn into catastrophes when caution is thrown to the wind. It also shows the complex tragedy on both sides of the story. The tragic loss of two innocent lives on the one hand, but also the loss of a careless childhood and emotional trauma caused to the boys that caused this awful tragedy. They must live the rest of their lives knowing what pain they caused. A life sentence much worse than prison. I know this is a very different episode to the usual clear bad guy in the story, but I believe its emotional and legal complexities made it a story definitely worth telling. So, thank you so much for listening, and be sure to subscribe and leave a review. Also, don't forget to follow The Lowest Crime on Instagram to find all images related to the case. I look forward to seeing you in the next one.